What frankly made it difficult was the sheer size of this model. It's enormous. Hey, what's up guys? I promised you in a video a long time ago about the full-scale flying pterosaur, Penelope, the Quetzalcoatlus northropi model that comes in at a 38-foot wingspan and what it was actually like to test fly it. So the first video, if you check out right here, the card, was more about the building of it and the basic general. But in terms of actually testing it out, how do you test fly an animal model that no one's ever seen before that's the size of a medium fixed-wing aircraft? Well, the first problem is how do you get it up in the air? So it doesn't have a propeller. We're not making an ornithopter, as a lot of engineers will get a little too high in the sky. Of course, an animal like that, most likely going to be a soaring animal using thermals and flying on air currents and being really big in that regard. So what do? Effectively, it's a fixed-wing aircraft. It's a glider. So the best way to do it is to tether it to a vehicle. So the first thing is I called a buddy of mine that has a big farm and gravel roads on private property. That's perfect. And in terms of the animal and launching the actual glider model, we weren't trying to send it like way up in the air. The whole purpose of this was to test effectively the proof of concept to be able to see it. So we're flying it right off the back of a vehicle with actual rope tethers, not fixed, because we need to be able to see if it's stable on yaw, pitch, and roll, and all that sort of thing. So a normal car, not even remotely big enough. You can see I thought about actually launching it from my Dodge Viper because that could get up to speed very quickly, come back down, very agile in that regard. However, the Pterosaur model, 38-foot wingspan, it's enormous. So we're going to use the truck. It's the big turbo diesel F350 extended cab dually. So we can put a lot of people in there and had to build a big wooden support, shall we say a cradle, and also something to catch and receive it when you're landing it then. So made that out of 2x4s and actually made it, I believe, at like the full legal width of what you can actually drive down the road with, because it didn't want to have to reassemble that when we got to the farm. I think that might be something like 102 inches wide, which frankly is just big enough that when the animal lands, effectively the wing, the bones, shall we say, or where the muscles are, that you can see there before the pinky finger bones that come at the leading edge of the wings, those would hit that space. So as long as it lands reasonably centered, it would be caught by those two long 2x4s, which are at about approximate 20-degree angle, maybe 15 degrees somewhere. Honestly, I can't remember what we did. And that was there for a purpose because we wanted it effectively at the highest angle of attack, just sitting on the cradle before most wings will start to stall, if that makes sense to aviation guys. And then of course the rear had a catch where the two legs of the animal would connect there. Now, so that's very simple. You know, every kid that's ever launched a kite knows you start running with it against the wind and you get it up in the air. That's effectively exactly what we were doing with the Pterosaur model. And, you know, obviously you can make it into radio control, you can make it in an airplane, you can do a lot of things with it. And quite frankly, it's big enough. With enough wingspan, you could easily put a man on it. But the best way to test it initially was to tether it. So with regard to the truck and when we got to the farm, it's very important. I mentioned a kite. Now, a kite is something that if it has the stability of weight and center of pressure and where the tether or your string is tied, allows it to effectively fly. And of course, it has to be stable enough that it will maintain direction into the wind. Sometimes you have a tail with a kite, everything like that. But a kite is not an airfoil necessarily. Nicer ones are, but a kite is also not an airplane. So for better proof of concept, can this animal fly? Like effectively a biological fixed-wing aircraft. We had to tether it more like you would a glider, such as when you tether launch a sailplane. And in doing that, it was difficult because you have to weigh, in an aircraft, you have a center of pressure. That's where most of your lift is being created. And of course, you have the balance and the weight and balance. And then you have the point where the tether picks it up. Where about is that? How can it move? Does it make it stable? So what was interesting in terms of the actual engineering problem of testing this animal and model, it effectively met somewhere between fixed-wing aircraft, kite, and sailplane tethers. So it's very interesting. It was a very unique and exciting experiment to do that. What frankly made it difficult was the sheer size of this model. It's enormous. Even with a big turbo diesel dually truck and this big cradle put on it, really we needed to have the animal even higher to start with because we would like to have had the tether point lower. Because where we connected it is we connected it to effectively where, and if you look at the wings of the animal, the point where the bone starts at the leading edge of the wing and then comes to is effectively the pinky finger bone of the animal. These 3 fingers on the animal are effectively there for grappling. That's what the animal can use to grab onto with. And then the thumb bone, which in the animal is called a pteroid bone, comes out this way and effectively is there to control this flap of skin at the leading edge of the wing. So a lot of interesting things that go into biomechanics, paleontology, as well as aerospace engineering. But so the pinky finger bone, this is where we picked up the points on the outer tethers that come into the center. And then the rear was actually picked up at the tail, right between the legs of the animal there. Because we can find a triangulated, effectively a prism, and find that point that we want to pull the animal from. However, it would have been potentially more stable if we could have gone further away from the animal, but to do so, the animal would have to be higher from our point in the truck. So made it a little more interesting because we really had to nail that weight and balance and center pressures and things like that. Now, with regard to the truck, if you can see, we arrived there, had a team of people, had a student, his family came out, his parents, my wife was there. It was great fun. And of course my old buddy. So we assembled the thing, we're tethering it, we're tying the 2 wings together, all the string and line, much like you might tension a really high-tech sail of a racing sailboat in some ways, because we really wanted this model to reflect what the animal could have been, with a flexible wing membrane, with the bones being able to move, being organic, but of course it was effectively a fixed-wing aircraft. So the tethers, big line, like climber rope effectively. And in the bottom of the truck, we had a pulley system designed so that actually a person could lay in the bottom of the truck and put their feet up against, a strong person, mind you, and you could hold onto this rope with pulley reduction system to it, and then some knots, of course, so that the model couldn't escape and just fly off. It could only get maybe 6 feet up. And that was exciting. And then, of course, I was down there in the bottom manning that line, as well as another gentleman who was the father of one of our students, and I gave him my motorcycle road racing gloves, really good there. And then myself and a friend of one of my students, we stood in the bed of the truck, leaning up against the cabin backwards. And of course, that cradle that was built in is such a way that it really would be impossible for us to fall out, which is good because frankly, this was kind of scary and exciting. This is when engineering and paleontology becomes both fun and exciting. So we were there, and so the animal's sitting there, it's got it tethered. But the problem is, this is a test. We've never done this before. In theory, in practice, you take your best guess in engineering, but there comes a time to do it. And things can happen that, one, you didn't account for or you don't expect. What if we had a crazy crosswind? What if something like that happened? What if, quite frankly, we just got our set of pressures and balance and line wrong? And even if it's close, we have to test it and get it right. So, safety-wise, one, we didn't want this giant animal in the truck to suddenly yaw really badly like this, or get out of control in terms of its roll. In terms of roll center with an airplane, heck, I got an airplane right here in my chest. These wings, as you can see, are pretty straight. This is a racing airplane. But on most airplanes, if you look, they come up slightly. That's called dihedral. The reason being is if the airplane accidentally rolls this way, the center of pressure or center of lift acts directly to the ground, then this one is acting out this way. So effectively, this wing lifts more from gravity and rights it. Okay. For instance, on this Indy car, on high-speed ovals, the wings actually point downward, which is anhedral, since an airplane is trying to go to the ground and they're counteracting roll. It's a different sort of thing. But I digress. So our Penelope, the model, Pterosaur, had dihedral, approximately 3.5 degrees on each side, much like the Sopwith Camel we built. So it's pretty stable in terms of roll that way, just like any aircraft would be, any docile aircraft would be. So we didn't really have difficulty with that. However, if you look at the neck of this animal, one, it's very long, okay? And it's got that head crest, which would be potential for the animal to be able to look and steer and move and do all that. However, this is rigidly built. So that's something that would actually work against us, because if the animal suddenly started to yaw like this, what happens is that head crest, instead of being in the direction you're turning, if it accidentally starts yawing this way, the wind will blow it and make it worse. So that's something that would actually be difficult. And it was very important that we got, like I said, the tether and everything right so it would be as stable as possible. Unfortunately, it's a day with very little crosswind component or any blustering or blowing, so that really helped out. But the other thing is, if you notice the wings, they taper backwards, okay? So there were aspects about how it flies through the air that counteracts that negative effect of the head crest pushing it aside when we don't have an animal or servo to help be able to effectively point it in the right direction. So anyway, it comes time to do it. And I was thinking, based upon our weight and lift and everything going on and our approximate headwind, that we would initially start to get lift somewhere in that 25 miles an hour zone and something would happen, okay? So we're taking it reasonable, actually just drove down and back about 25 miles an hour right at that edge where it starts to do stuff, just to check it, just for the people in the truck, chase vehicles with cameras and stuff to see what's going on. And we built up to that slowly. It's kind of like when you take a race car testing, you don't just go flat out. You know, you might have to heat cycle brakes and tires and get everything ready, and also get good balance with your braking systems. So it's the same thing when you test something like this. And it's a lot of work that goes into a test model, so it's got to be right. So initially, what we figured is this. One, frankly, this was kind of scary. We're in the back of a pickup truck with a bunch of people bombing down the road, and we're trusting the person there to do a good job and everything like that. And we have this giant fixed wing aircraft, effectively, that gets out of control. It's going to try to like knock us out of the truck, which is exciting, actually. But the first thing we did was, for the animal, and you'll see it in the video, the legs are in the back, and myself and the gentleman that was standing next to me on either side of the neck, we could push up on the front of the animal. So effectively, we got it to a high angle of attack, high alpha. And once it got to there, and it would hold itself there, we would know about that speed's ready. But the real test is not doing that, because effectively that's just a kite that's resting some of its weight still on the truck. But when you get up to a higher speed, when that back end picks up, as long as it's stable and stays there, that's when it's flying. That's the moment that it's actually flying. So that's when it would get exciting and scary. The next couple of runs we built up where this would come up. And we noticed a little bit of a yaw factor. So we tested it. We even tested it taking the head off, just to make sure. We wanted to get our center pressures, we wanted to test things right before we put the head back on and made things more difficult. So that was going very well. We got it up in the air like that. We're starting to get it up. It was a little bit off. It was trying to roll to one side. We were adjusting our test rig with the line to get it perfectly centered and get it all right and balanced. So we get the animal back together, get the head back on. We're starting to go. But the difficulty we ran into with regard to the construction, this being the prototype and the first proof of concept, was the membrane of the wings and the nature of the way the carbon fiber tube bends that effectively replicates that pinky finger bone. The difficulty is at rest here, when you push up, it creates an airfoil surface shape, much like a sailboat, a good sailboat, shall we say. When the sails on a sailboat poof out, they're effectively creating an airfoil. It's not just a sail like you're just blowing on a leaf or something like a kite pushing it. It's actually creating lift in the horizontal direction to move that sailboat forward. So it doesn't matter if it's a small sailboat or 250-foot clipper ship with square rigs. It's kind of neat like that to think about the crossover. But what was happening was, in practice, our airfoil shape was flattening out. Under real wind conditions and real weight and everything going on, we were losing virtually all of our nice airfoil shape, and it was losing efficiency. The other aspect, which you'll see where it was losing some efficiency, was it needed to be tensioned more in the trailing edge closer to the body. And what was happening, the wing membrane surface was fluttering, which completely will just destroy your laminar airflow and make that hugely inefficient. But we carry on. We want to see where we're at. We want a baseline. We want to know how far we can go. What do we got here? Of course, without destroying the model. So we kept going, and it was getting excited. It was up in the air. It was flying. The only difference is we ended up being at a higher speed than we expected and a higher angle of attack, or alpha, because those wing membranes were going flatter. We were losing our efficiency there, and based on what we thought we could do. So actually, we were having to do somewhere in the area of 45 to 50 miles an hour before it was really flying strongly. It would fly right in that 40 mile an hour range, but not real great. And at a higher angle of attack. And the other thing too, because of the alpha, our stability was a little different than it would be in the future. So when we got it to that point, it was exciting and it was scary. There were a few times when we were adjusting the harness that it did start to yaw to one side heavily. But keep in mind, 38-foot wingspan. The Sopwith Camel biplane our students built last year has a 28-foot wingspan. And myself and the other student and the other guy are wrestling this thing out of the back of the truck with tethers that we're holding onto or are tied to the truck. Now, one safety precaution we did was this. Both myself and the other gentleman that were up here by the shoulders of the animal and right by the neck, we had a safety tether tied from the truck cradle to that that bone out here. And the purpose of that was it was a little extra long, okay, so that if the animal's flying where it's supposed to be, okay, on the actual tether to the truck, those lines would be limp. However, if it were to get out of control and it were to yaw really badly or try to roll off, or we lost the tether or something like that, they would go tight and keep the animal effectively on the truck, and it wouldn't be a disaster. Also be safer for all of us. But that still doesn't mean that it's not going to try to kick your butt. So there was a couple of times when the yaw was off. We had it up there and we could actually push on the animal, and just with your hand, just that little bit of an input, we could help keep it stable, since we didn't have any control surfaces and the nature of the tether was not like hugely dynamically stable. We had it right on there in terms of flight, which is very exciting. Very exciting to see this massive model right there, not to mention the fact that we're standing in the back of a pickup truck doing 45 or 50 miles an hour on a gravel road. It's very exciting for everybody. There was a lot of cheers and a lot of fun moments going on camera too. But when it would go to yaw, I ended up grabbing the neck like this and wrestling, and I'm like, just pushing me over here like this. So a little bit sore the next day, but it was kind of fun because we got to wrangle a dinosaur. Technically not a dinosaur. Dinosaur means terrible lizard, and this is pterosaur, which means flying lizard, if you want to be technical. But we got it to that point, and it was really exciting. Really, the flights were short. The run we had was less than a quarter mile. So by the time you get up to that speed, get it up in the air properly, first you get the front up, then you're up and flying, you may have only had between 5 to 10 seconds of actual flying. But that's enough for the proof of concept, to see the center of pressure, the balance, to get video footage on the airfoil surface and where to go from there. So it was absolutely incredibly exciting. And it was so neat. We're all so happy to have it up there and just watch it fly. It was truly the most amazing thing. In a way, it was literally like being able to fly with a pterosaur. And no one's seen a giant full-scale one of these fly. It was 60, 70 million years ago, the end of the Cretaceous era. So, you know, I was happy to do it with Genius Garage and with the students because it's silly. Everybody just thinks dinosaurs is a stupid kid's thing. You know, the lizards have nothing to do with anything. And what private equity or business guy is going to give a crap nowadays because it's not going to make you any money. But that's not what it is. It's about having a challenge for your mind in engineering, in art, and inspiration. And Genius Garage gives incredible opportunities to young engineers and young designers to chase their dreams and to do things that get them noticed to get jobs. And by doing this and spearheading it with the pterosaur that nobody's done to this scale, it's to inspire. It's to let the students think it's absolutely ridiculous and anybody else, but go out there and actually do it, actually learn something, and for it to be exciting. And if we look back, it was 1980, I think 5 or 6, when Paul MacCready, who was an aerospace engineer that was famous for the Gossamer Albatross and the Gossamer Condor, which were human-powered airplanes that I believe flew over the English Channel back in the 70s. But in the mid-80s, he did a half-scale Quetzalcoatlus that was radio control for the Smithsonian, sponsored by SC Johnson Wax. And that was something that was very inspiring. Of course, that was back in the 80s. That was before my students were even born and when I was a small child. And some of you may remember also a flying pterosaur model in the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick from Professor Falcon when they found him. So it was just very exciting, and it's very inspirational, and it means a lot to have it here hanging from the ceiling in Genius Garage. So when anybody comes in, you're working on race cars, you're building an airplane, inspiration is no farther than just looking up. As for the future, like I said, our airfoils went a little flat, and actually I was sitting watching a high definition video in 4K of a nature documentary, and we were watching flying fruit bats. And while bats have a totally different flying surface of their membranes, because actually they effectively have all of their finger bones coming out into the membranes, whereas the pterosaur has just the pinky finger bone effectively and 3 bones for grabbing. So it's different, but it is similar because the bat has a wing membrane. And if you look at very high definition footage of bats gliding, like if they're grabbing something off the top of water or whatnot, you can actually see that, like the sail of a sailboat or a clipper ship, that wing membrane is forming a very good airfoil shape and nothing's fluttering. So really just taking a little inspiration from that, even though way back when people first discovered pterosaurs, they got everything wrong because they were looking at bats and not getting it. But in looking at these clues in the world around us, helps you figure it out. So we've got a real neat way to make new wing membranes for the animal to test it out again. Maybe we'll make a whole new model. But either way, it's going to be a great learning opportunity in engineering, aerospace engineering, paleontology, history, biomechanics. Just another wonderful opportunity in Genius Garage. So I hope you guys like this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And wouldn't hurt if you shared it too. Let's blow this channel up and do something great. Thanks, guys.